There's a lot of options, there's a lot of chaos, and there's a lot of information. But when we look at the landscape and what the horse's physiology requires, we have this simple, more pure way of feeding, and we've demonstrated this.
You've got to look at everything that you're feeding, and is it actually helping your diet or is it actually hindering your diet? And the more things you feed, the harder it is to balance that whole diet.
Welcome everyone to episode 124 of the CEN Nutrition Podcast. You're with your host Bryan Peter today, and today's subject is on the CEN Feed Pyramid, simplify your horse's diet. How are you, Peter?
Bryan, I feel like I'm 124 years old, I think, this week.
Welcome back into Australia. We had a little bit of a winter hiatus with the podcast, but it's good to have you back.
Yeah, I've been away for about 4 weeks in Europe, so I've officially sacked the gin and I've employed the Aperol spritzers.
And I believe you have been doing a bit of networking in the endurance industry over there.
Bryan, absolutely. We'll have our first rider in the World Championships, the FEI in France, coming up, I think, in September, early September there. So we're working with a particular rider that'll have two horses in the actual competition itself. So look, it's early days. We'll see how it goes, but there are a few irons in the fire.
Yeah, CEN's definitely been put on the international map with the success in Australia. And today, this podcast really is going to highlight our mantra and the way we set up our diets and feeding more efficiently, cost effective and simply.
Bryan, there's so much noise in the industry, and whenever we do the phone calls, we do a few diets, there's always the typical story. I'm feeding 3 or 4 different feeds, I'm feeding 5 or 6 different supplements, I'm adding this, I'm adding that. And people are they're confused, they're spending a fortune, they're not getting the desired results, and they're just at an absolute loss.
And when you set up the diet for a horse, everyone is an individual. Looking at your friend's horse, as we've said in the past, you can't compare due to metabolic rates, genetics, the way they've grown up in their environment, and everyone has a different training and the way they look after their horses. So you have to really zero down. But then, as Peter said, there's a lot of options, there's a lot of chaos, and there's a lot of information. But when we look at the landscape and what the horse's physiology requires, we have this simple, more pure way of feeding, and we've demonstrated this in a feed pyramid similar to the human one, but the human one's debatable, and this one is more on the lines of supporting their body systems, but with the foundation right at the start.
Yeah, that's well said, Bryan. Probably the biggest difference between our company and some of the other companies, probably more the feed manufacturers I'm referring to, is they're in the business of selling feed, and I'm talking about volume feed, whether it's 4, 5, 6 kilograms of a particular feed. We've only got one feed. So obviously, we're in a business of selling feed, but we've got an oil, we've got a salt, we've got supplements. So we're actually selling a balanced diet to our customers. We're not selling a particular product.
And we're in the business of feeding towards the physiology of the horse, and the physiology of the horse makes sense when you add at least 1.5% approximately body weight in kg of pasture, hay, or a roughage source to support that foundation, not the other way around.
Absolutely. And as our listeners might be looking at this, obviously we've got the picture in the podcast, or they might be on our website actually looking at the feed pyramid. And the number one, the most important part of the pyramid is hay or pasture.
So the horse evolved on this in the wild, and we are bringing them into domestication to do a job, to undergo training in their specific discipline. And their natural urge is to consume this hay and pasture amount, and it shouldn't be restricted.
Bryan, I know, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners know that horses are trickle feeders. So basically they need to have something in front of their face 24/7. What it does, it reduces ulcers, it reduces stress, it makes for a calmer horse. So there's so many benefits. We could talk about it all day, but this is why we have the hay or pasture as the number one and most important part of the diet.
Yeah, it's that natural ulcer preventative. And when you look scientifically, how does hay and pasture prevent that? Well, the saliva, the chewing action, it produces in excess of 20 litres up to 60 litres of saliva, which is like that antacid, that it all makes sense on a natural level, because if they're producing that much saliva, what is it buffering? It's buffering 30 to 50 litres of acid rising in their stomach every 24 hours. this is why they want to put their head down to calm that gastric environment rather than going the opposite way and feeding, and as Peter will touch on, feeding those 4 to 5 kgs of a hard feed, but then they might not have that appetite to eat their roughage amount. And then that's when it starts circling and the results start not coming to fruition.
Absolutely, Brian. And look, we hear it day in, day out where, there might be a customer might be feeding 4 or 5 kilos and they're like, well, my horse doesn't want to eat hay or my horse doesn't want to eat pasture. And, the stomachs can only hold 2.2 kilograms of a grain-based feed in any one sitting. So if you've got a horse that gulps the food and it fills that stomach to the brim, there's no room there for the pasture or the hay.
Yeah, especially when it's a high starch sugar level. And when we define high, and that's like 30, 40, 50%, when you look at that actually makes that gastric environment even more acidic. And then it's sort of that cascade of events that happens. And then the horse just doesn't want to perform or doesn't reach that maximum ability or effort they want to put in. So getting the hay and pasture right, depending on where you live, your pasture may be the best, it may be the worst, then choosing a hay that matches that. And we always recommend that native grass or that grassy hay. And for the loosened feeders out there, that should be kept to a minimum. You use that around your training as that buffer source. Horses are different to humans. They can have that roughage in their gastric environment. We're told not to go and have a big meal, then run around. It's the absolute opposite to a horse, because the hay, that grassy hay, balls up and stops that acid splash. So it goes against human intervention or humanizing the horse. And as Peter and we profile a lot of farms and trainers around Australia, and we look at pasture analysis, and we all agree that grassy type is the best. When you look at the barley hays, even the oaten hays, they're not as good.
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. It's just basically what's natural for horses, those grassy hays. And look, for our listeners in Queensland, it might be a Rhodes grass hay. In New South Wales, it might be a Rhodes or a Coxfoot. Victoria's a little bit harder, so that's where you got to go to those sort of native pastures. Whatever is native to to that area.
So as we've outlined there, the hay and pasture base, and that's that bottom part of the pyramid, is your largest part. So for a 500 kg horse, it looks like around 7.5 kgs of roughage continually every day being ingested by the horse. And that's going to put a really good foundation. But this is actually depleted in trace minerals and also has a different balance of electrolytes. So Australian soil conditions has a higher iron level just naturally, but also has higher potassium. We've seen that time and time again, and we've seen trainers trying to supplement potassium on top of all that potassium that's in the hay and pasture just off a blood test. But that's another story, that the horse's kidneys are really continually balancing that out on a daily basis. So when we identify the shortfalls of the vitamin minerals in the hay and pasture, that's our next step to step 2 of our pyramid.
Brian, and that's where the grain-free ultimate comes in. So whether you're on a pasture diet or whether you're on a hay diet, that product will still balance out any shortfalls in vitamins and minerals. And as you said, the biggest culprit in Australia and in New Zealand and in the UK is iron. It's absolutely rife. So what you want to be feeding a supplement, or you want to be feeding a product that's much higher in zinc and copper than iron, because correct me if I'm wrong, iron needs to be at least 3 times less than the zinc to copper ratio. Is that correct?
Yeah, it has to be as low as possible. And as the amount they ingest, you should be feeding something balanced that has no added iron in our feed. We got those natural ingredients that has a base amount of iron. It's not overdone. So we've got at least 7 to 8 times more zinc, 3 to 4 times more copper to really help these ratios of trace minerals, because it's not just the levels, it's those ratios to help with the absorption of these trace minerals to be used around the body. And horses can't excrete that iron overload. It just gets stored around. And looking at the overall diet makeup with the forage and the hard feed included, the ideal iron to copper to zinc to manganese ratio, you want that to be around 5 parts iron to 1 part copper, 4 parts zinc, and 4 parts manganese. You can get it up to about 10 parts iron, but But you don't want to go more than that because the horse cannot excrete this, and then you'll get deficiencies in the other trace minerals due to the lack of absorption. And we'll go through that balance for all their body systems to really zero down on what you require. But as Peter just mentioned before, CEN Grain-Free Ultimate is one for those horses that are in performance, the harder keeper, because you're getting the calories with it. We also have the CEN 50, which is a concentrated version of it, 4 times concentrated. And this is really good. If you've got an abundance amount of pasture that's quite rich, high in calories, this will really balance this out on a low calorie basis, but then hits your vitamin mineral targets in a very even ratioed way.
That's very well explained, Brian. And it's also very cost effective. So if some of our listeners have got access to pasture and it's pretty good pasture, look, with the grain free, if they did choose to feed it, they might feed, maybe 500 grams. We would prefer, obviously, for a good doer to be on a CF50, which is the concentrated version of the grain free, and they might get away with with 100 grams. So you're looking at your cost per feed anywhere from sort of $2 to $2.50, and that might be enough, obviously, with a little bit of salt. So you look at that comparison where if you're feeding at the moment 4 kilograms of a commercial feed, and you've got abundant, really good pasture, you're sending yourself broke because you're filling up the horse's gut with a man-made feed and that it's not eating the pasture, which costs you nothing.
Yeah, we've done it time and time again over the years. We're turning 10 years old this month, at the end of this month, and we can use many farms as an example. Like we've done that pasture testing. It's come up quite good with its protein, with its whole balance. It just needs to be balanced, and you don't need 3, 4, 5 kgs on top of that because that's just shortcutting the horse's appetite for this pasture, and the pasture's free on the farm because they've spent so much money in developing it and really getting it nutrient rich that they just need that balancer on top that's a really healthy one. And the thing that sets us apart is we're very pure the way our pellet is made. There's no unnecessary oils. That's another thing we'll touch on when we talk about adding oils separately to be the most effective but not detrimental to the horse. And our low sugar and starch base really complements those sugars that may be in that pasture as well.
Yeah, Brian, that's really well explained. I don't have too much more to add on to that one, to be honest with you.
But what we have to remember now is on the step 3 of this pyramid. So what the shortfalls in pasture is balanced in step 2 with the CEN CF50 and the CEN Grain-Free Ultimate. What we need is sodium and chloride. So we can't fit enough sodium and chloride into the pellet, and we don't have enough in the pasture because that's high in potassium and also the hay as well. So what we've sourced is something that is the most pure salt, regarded as macrobiotic, so free of microplastics, from a non-polluted source, also has trace minerals with it. So it's a high trace mineral salt that really, what we're trying to do is it's better tasting because some horses just don't like that kind of industrial bleached out salt that you see. And the market that we see is when you're feeding a horse, we want food grade. We want something that's not detrimental to their systems, but because you're feeding it on a daily basis. And when you see pool salt being fed to a horse, it can actually run a risk of its industrial process. It's not meant for horses. And if you ask a pool shop, they actually dodge the question because it is intended for pools and not for an animal. And it can void insurances if you've got that top level performer as well.
Yeah, that's well summarised. Probably the biggest feedback we get on our salt is that it doesn't taste salty. And, why? So as Brian mentioned, I think it's 82 or 87 trace minerals. So what it is, most bleached commercial salts are 99.9 or 99.5% sodium chloride, and what they actually do is if it's a natural salt, they'll take the actual minerals out of the salt, and they'll sell the minerals separately to pharmaceutical companies or supplement companies, and then the sodium chloride is left. Where the salt that we source, it's actually got the 82 or 88 trace elements in there. So the sodium chloride is not at 99%, it might be at 95% or it might be at 93%. So it's a lot lower. This is why it's not as salty.
Yeah, we're really happy with our source as it is free of heavy metals as well, not coming from the ocean. And when you mix it with the CEN CF50 and the CEN Grain-Free Ultimate, you're getting that complete profile. Going back onto those two, they both also contain that marine calcium and magnesium, which is highly bioavailable, really helps that overall balance of the calcium and phosphorus. So when you look at the 1, 2, 3 part of this pyramid, this is a really successful base that we have formulated a lot of feed diets across the country over the years and has been successful. And then you've just got to get each amount right for your environment. So salt-wise, it is recommended minimum 5 to 10 grams per 100 kg body weight. What does that look like? 400 kg horse, around that 40 grams of salt. A horse requires 25 grams of salt just to exist with its body systems and everything like that. It may get some of that from its pasture. It may get some out of the pellet, out of the balancer pellet, but ensuring this salt on top really gets their thirst activation going, particularly in winter. But also, we have to remember impaction colic can be rife throughout winter because they're not drinking enough, they're not hydrated. So this is one of the most simple remedies if your horse is colic prone, to just add salt on top, because if you add a little bit too much, the kidneys just filter this and they regulate this on a daily basis. So it's consistency of feeding daily and right is where you have to be to have a horse thriving in its environment.
Yeah, Bryan, if we put 50 grams of salt into a kilogram of our product, no horse will eat it. And that's why a lot of feed companies don't add it in at that high level.
Yeah, we have to squeeze in the other better parts of it. It's an inexpensive source that's highly effective, and we don't recommend the salt lick blocks in the stables, in the yards. You can use it if you've got a horse that's, if you put it in there to stop it gulping its feed or something like that, but don't rely on this as the salt, because the studies show that they do not regulate and they don't lick exactly 40 or 50 grams per day. They might do it out of boredom and eat the whole block in one part, which I've heard before.
Well, like you imagine, Bryan, if you're a horse and you got like a really long tongue, like you imagine trying to lick the salt block every day, 365 days of the year. Jeez. Your tongue's going to be shredded like...
Yeah, it's just an unnatural way, or it comes down to that regulation.
Yeah. My tongue will be shredded like your six-pack.
Thanks, Pete. Anyway... so when you get these bases right, what else are we looking in the horse's body systems to get the best out of them? And when we look at pasture and hay, we look back to what is the shortfalls in this. And when you compare pasture to a dried out hay that's been cut, it does lose that omega-3, that natural amount. And when you look at horses' body systems, they've evolved on that plant-based omega-3. And that's why CEN oil was developed, because we needed a high-quality plant-based source of omega-3 that emulated the goodness out of the pasture.
Absolutely, Bryan. And look, the CEN oil is the only first cold-pressed oil on the market. So obviously some listeners might know that might not know. The industry is not very well regulated for animal feeds and supplements, so you have to go by brand trust. We guarantee the omega-3. We guarantee that it's not rancid. If you were to test maybe some other companies all pretending that it's the same as CEN oil, it's never going to be the freshness, the quality, or anything like that. So we've been in business for 10 years. The CEN oil is the number one selling oil in Australia as well. So I think credibility, past performance has to go a long way. But going back onto the pasture and the hay, so the omega-3 is not probably as important if you're on a pasture diet, because as Bryan mentioned, there is pasture in the hay. But saying that, if you've got a horse that's in performance and you're training every second day or every day, you're going to need the fat as an energy source. And we've said this a million times, fat is a slow release energy source. It doesn't create insulin spikes. You're going to get a much calmer horse. So even though the requirements of omega-3 are not as high on pasture, you still need the fat. And then if you're exercising a horse, obviously there's more inflammation. So by feeding a CEN oil, it's a natural anti-inflammatory. It's only going to help the horse recover a lot quicker. If you're on a hay-only diet, obviously that hay has dried from pasture. There might be a little bit of omega-3. There might not be any omega-3. And that's where the CEN oil is mostly recommended. And, between 55 and 60% omega-3, you're actually going to be replicating what's naturally in pasture at that 3-to-1 ratio of omega-3 to omega-6.
Yeah, it's bringing nature back into that stable environment for performance. And what you look at, the traditional oils fed in many industries were too high in omega-6. You got your vegetable oils, your corn oils, rice bran. They're the reverse omega profile to what is in pasture. So it just didn't make sense to us to develop something that was going against nature. And when you look at our feed, we don't put the oil in there because oil is really susceptible to rancidity when it's heated, and also creates free radicals within the horse, which need to be balanced up with antioxidants. Otherwise, the horse is not reaching its potential in recovery. And as you look at the new research that comes through, our oil type being the best and first cold press, comparing it to an omega-6 oil, our omega-3 oil helps the red blood cells. It helps the antioxidant activity. So you're actually maximizing your horse's body systems for their performance by feeding the CEN oil on top, and not just reaching for a cheap vegetable oil from the supermarket that's probably going to do more harm than good in the long term. So each part of this pyramid makes sense, and it's all put together nicely, because it wouldn't make sense if we put an oil in our feed and then we told you to feed an oil on top to balance that out, because it's just unnecessary and an unnecessary load on the horse's digestive system and their body systems.
Yeah, well said. A lot of feed companies do put an oil into their feeds, and that's more from a marketing sort of ploy gimmick, I would call, because the argument is that, oh, well, we've already got an oil in our feed. You don't need to feed an oil on top. And in theory, it sort of makes sense. But I'm sort of scratching my head going, okay, well, if you're going to add an oil into a feed, you're going to heat it to 90, 100 degrees. That oil is going to oxidize while it's getting formed into a pellet. Now the horse is going to eat it, and now the body's got to mop up that oxidation, basically all the free radicals, to get rid of it. So you're burning energy to heal yourself. Why don't put the oil in the pellets, so then you're not causing that problem?
That's absolutely well said, Peter. And we all reach for our antioxidants like vitamin E. We've got a natural vitamin E, which is a better source than a synthetic one in our feeds. So you're feeding antioxidants to help your horse recover, but then you're also creating oxidation or oxidative stress by feeding a rancid oil within it. So then you're just reaching for more things to counteract, and it's not so pure. Whereas we are pure from the start, but then adding a very low peroxide value as acid valued oil compared to everyone else on the market because of the quality, and is not adding to that oxidation load within the horse. So then you're working with their systems to then get them to thrive in whatever discipline or chosen discipline. And as we go on, the research is developed to really back this up, and it's a no wonder we're still going really strong and growing in our 10th year.
Absolutely. And the peroxide value and the acid value, just for our listeners that don't know, it's the actual oxidation of the oil. So the lower the peroxide, the lower the acid value, basically the more stable the oil is and the more fresh it is. So we average around about 2 to 2.5, which is very low. Food grade standards is
below 10, I think.
Is below 10.
Or below, and sometimes below 5. And it's not just an omega-3 level. There's a lot of other things in oils like polyphenols, micronutrients, that oxidation. You might be feeding high omega-3, but if you're putting more oxidative stress in the horse, you're just counteracting everything.
Well, that's well said, because you might have a copycat oil at 55% omega-3, but if the acid value is 15, that omega-3 is nowhere near going to do the work as if the acid value is at 2.
Yeah, correct. And day by day, it'll keep breaking down. You need to store it properly. It should be in a dark bottle, should be free from light, should be used within a reasonable amount of time. But when you start on a lower oxidation level, your oil is a lot better and more stable.
Another reason why some manufacturers add oil into their pellets or into their mixes is to help the pelleting process. So it makes the oil works as a binder basically. So it's easier to make the pellet look nice and pretty. We just use a steam extraction process. So this is why we don't add the oil, because we don't believe, for valid reasons that we just outlined, we don't need an oil inside our pellet. So if you use a very good technique, which is a steam press technique, which we've mastered, you don't need to add any sort of binders or any sort of oils into the actual pellet to form a well pelleted feed.
And when you look at, now we've moved from the foundation, we're balancing it up with our hard feeds, we're balancing up with the salt, and then also the CEN oil. This foundation, when fed correctly and right, should be enough, but for those high performance horses, for the horses that have had probably maybe a poorer upbringing, they've been over medicated, more antibiotics, put under stress, can't handle stress as well, that's when supplements and further integration of natural ingredients is required. And that's just the top part of this pyramid.
Bryan, are you trying to do us out of supplement sales?
Well, if you get this base right and your horse is not under too much stress and can handle it,
that's exactly
and that's
what
exactly
I'm doing.
exactly the result we want to get, because we don't want you spending unnecessarily on things you don't need if your foundations are not right.
And Bryan, this is another difference between us at CEN. So we're not just a feed manufacturer. Obviously, we manufacture our own supplements. So our customers get the best of both, where I think if you're a supplements business, you're in the job of selling supplements. So whether the customer's feed's balanced or not, you can only sell supplements. Whether you're a feed manufacturer, you can only sell feed. So by having our CEN supplements to assist with existing conditions, we're not there to jam the supplements down the throat. When you do have a problem, we have a solution, obviously, with that problem, but we don't need to incorporate our supplements into the feed. I think that's something that Bryan and I have thought about for a long time as well. Do we need the supplements? Do we not need the supplements? We know that everyone in Australia and the world is not going to be feeding this feed pyramid, and they are going to want to feed maybe our electrolyte or our Ulcer Protect or Extra Balance or Gold. That's the reason why we have those supplements. And as Bryan rightly mentioned, if you've got a performance horse that you're training 5-6 days a week, we would recommend the Gold in the morning to help with the joint health, the Extra Balance in the evening to help with gut health. That's the foundation supplement. So every horse has a different need, but we're not here to jam supplements down people's throats. It's only on a as need basis.
Yeah, and it depends on your goals, where your level is. If you've got a horse showing symptoms that the supplements can help after you have your foundations right, then that's going to be all supportive. So for example, you got a horse that stresses on travel. We know the hindgut, if getting that right and getting that strong, will help the nutrient absorption. They won't drop off weight. That gut-brain connection really helps with the anxiety. The CEN Extra Balance is perfect. And that all flows back through our feed program with the pyramid, because it matches. We're not doubling up. It's all complementary. You may want to use another company's digestive supplement, and that's fine. But at CEN, we try and offer that full turnkey, you could say, solution that really gels well. We've still got that mantra, no fillers, no unnecessary ingredients throughout the range. They're pure. They're very, very good quality, human grade in some terms. And when you look at the high performance endurance horses that are going to be competing at that 100 to 160 kilometers, they don't want to leave anything to chance, and they want everything based around especially muscle health and hindgut health. And this is what we offer.
One thing that I've picked up, Bryan, doing a lot of these diet analysis, with yourself and the team, Jazz and Nicole, is that a lot of people are feeding different supplements from different companies. And it's just a word of warning that they really need to look at the ingredients, because you might have a feed that's high in iron, argument's sake. It might be a beet pulp that's high in iron. And now you're feeding a supplement that's, obviously maybe for the gut, but they've also got added iron. And then you've got another supplement that doesn't have the high zinc and copper that's required for that diet. So it's just a word of warning. You've got to look at everything that you're feeding, and is it actually helping your diet or is it actually hindering your diet? And the more things you feed, the harder it is to balance that whole diet. So as Bryan mentioned, with a full turnkey solution, you're guaranteed that all of our supplements will never work against each other. They all work with the diet, and whether that's with the grain-free ultimate, whether that's with the CF50, whether that's with the salt and the oil, every product of ours synergistically works together, never against each other.
Yeah, that's very well said, Peter. When you look at how a diet is made up from scratch with our diet consults, we're trying to simplify it. We're getting those foundations right. And when we always ask the reason, why are you adding this? What's your overall goal you want to achieve? And we've been offering the free diet consults, and it's a big eye-opener to the landscape that is out there. And there's still a lot of confusion, but we're trying to help each owner in an individual case basis really understand what parts of their diet is helping and what isn't. And there's a lot of parts that we unbalance ourselves by being a bit too fancy. Like, I'm not going to name any names, but I had a trainer call up that the calcium phosphorus ratio wasn't ideal, and then they would add oats the day before, and oats are high in phosphorus, so they're unbalancing even more, but they thought they were giving the horse more energy. That's just a simple example of the benefit of contacting us to try and find a better way, a more effective way, and not hindering the performance of the horse.
And Bryan, also, we do get a lot of callers as well that have seen an independent horse nutritionist, wherever they may be, and, they'll send you a 7 or 8 page, a million words outline of you should be feeding this. The issue is it's still going to be from different feed companies, different products, different supplements, and they're doing exactly what we at CEN have already done in our diet program. So if you have to feed a B pup from company A, you have to feed a high fiber feed from company B. If you have to feed a protein supplement from company C, and now you've got to get 3 or 4 supplements to balance that feed program, it's not a full turnkey solution. And if you feed, like, the more things you feed, and if something's out of stock, then what happens? As soon as it's out of stock for a week or two, your whole diet is unbalanced. So it makes no sense to me.
We can get a diet that has all green bars in particular programs, and the horse is not doing well. And that's when we get contacted, and they're like, how come? But the horse physically, and by the owner knowing the horse, we're able to assess what their needs are, not just going off, say, a computer program to say it's all good. But there might be something else wrong in the environment, in the hay and pasture. There's a lot of unknowns there, and it's just as much an art as it is a science with feeding horses, because they've all got different metabolic rates, they've all got different temperaments. There's not a one size fits all in terms of getting all green bars to hit that NRC, because the absorption rate could be different. But what we've found is when you feed a more pure way, a way that has a reason behind everything, 9 times out of 10 we're going to get it right, and you won't need to make those tweaks. And that's the success of the whole CEN Feed program.
And that's why I've got to sort of commend and give a big shout out to Jasmine and Nicole. They actually take the time to listen to, obviously, what's wrong with the horse. How long has the problem been? Is there anything existing? Is there any medication? Like, what are you feeding? How many? Is there anything else? What Bryan's saying with the green bars being 100%, that's just a guide. It's not God's Bible. It's not, they haven't tested your particular pasture. You might have got it from paddock A, but paddock B is different. It's a great tool, don't get me wrong, to point you in the right direction. But if you've got all the green bars and you've got all the ticks and your horse is still not right, obviously something's wrong, as Bryan mentioned. And that's where I think reaching out and doing a one-on-one is the way to go.
Yeah, and when you have conditions such as these metabolic horses, insulin resistant, the laminitis prone, there's so many different degrees of this, and we have to remember, yes, there are percentage guidelines, but really look at the amount fed per meal, and this is going to vary for a lot of different horses. a horse in performance has a very good insulin response due to being fit and muscles having more insulin receptors. And when you train a horse and want the best out of them, trying to get that balance right can be tricky, but it's all zeroing down into the degree of that metabolic issue. And it really isn't quite as simple as just looking at a percentage on a bag and going, I'm going to feed this amount or this. It does require some deep diving, and you knowing the horse and you trialing things to see and trying to fit those puzzle pieces right, because at the end of the day, the horse needs to have enough energy to perform at its best without being over tipped metabolically. But there are ways to do this in this feed pyramid very successfully, and even locally, a lot of vets have been having very good success with this pyramid, with the CEN Grain-Free Ultimate.
Bryan, what we've done is we basically balanced everything. This is why it's a feed pyramid, because we've gone through and we've done hundreds of hay and pasture analysis. We've developed the products for Australian conditions. What we're finding is that the conditions in Australia, New Zealand, UK, and I'm sure that in America, it's probably the same. So it's funny how the whole world is sort of very similar. We haven't gone crazy on the sugar and starch. Obviously, if you're in a performance stable and you've got race horses or or there's other power disciplines, maybe like barrel racing, you might be adding some oats into the actual ration, but you're going to burn that excess starch and carbohydrates off because you're in intense performance. So what I'm trying to say is that it has to be balanced, and there's no one size fits all, but I think we've done a pretty good job with balancing this for the general consumer.
Yeah, and additionally to what Peter says is we're not overloading their system with unnecessary ingredients like the sugars and starches. And when you find that balance, your horse will reach that ability that it has inside them, feel better, and then you've got one less worry with the diet. You can then concentrate on your training techniques and also the management of the horse. So Peter, is there anything else you'd want to add on this pyramid?
Bryan, I think it's been a really good, interesting podcast for us to, especially for the first one, since we've had a bit of ring rust for the last 4 weeks. If anyone's not sure and you're battling with your horse, you're sort of you're feeding 18 different things and you're not happy, there's limited spaces available on the free diet analysis. If you jump on our website, on the side tab, click horse free diet analysis. There's a booking section there. Just pick the day and the time that suits you. You're going to get either myself, Bryan, Jazz, or Nicole. We're all incredibly skilled. We've got all the time in the world. We'll go through the whole process. You can tell us what your goals are. There's a few simple questions that are answered, but we'll highly recommend. It'll give you peace of mind as well. There's nothing worse than like doing everything you can from the right place in your heart, but then seeing your horse still not right. And you can sort of freak out and start adding more things and panicking and doing this, doing that. And the more that you add, sometimes the worse that it gets. So maybe just scaling it back and then getting some fresh eyes and sort of someone independent to look at it might give you that peace of mind. And the last point is, I think we're at 81 5-star reviews on Spotify.
Can we get to 100?
Bryan set a goal at 100. We don't know how long. Obviously, the sooner the better. But if you're out there and you're liking these podcasts, share it with your friends and family. But please leave that 5-star review for us. It helps the ranking. I think we're in the top 1 or 2 podcasts in Australia.
Yeah, and if you do enjoy a bit of banter, and I think we go on their podcast tomorrow. Yeah, the Endurance Chatter. This is for the endurance horse people out there, and even general horses. They have got their own podcast, and it's unedited, more raw. And yeah, Peter and I are going to be featured on there tomorrow. But I think I'll just echo Peter's thoughts. If you're totally unsure of where you stand with your horse, or you're wondering whether you can get them to perform better, don't hesitate to reach out. And it's really a simple service, but can be very effective and give you the confidence to feed this way and get the results in the end.
And we don't go the hard sell on the phone. I know it might be a bit daunting to sort of pick up that phone and call or give you details and for us to call, but it's never about the hard sell. We've been in a scam for too long to worry about that. Maybe if we were kicking off 6 months ago, we'd be desperate, but we're not. Yeah. I believe in good karma. Like the more you give, the more comes back to you. And I think sometimes people just want to have that conversation because they're lost and I don't know where to go.
Yeah. And we've got the runs on the board. We've got a lot of very good CEN ambassadors. We're performing at the highest and elite level, and our brand is actually really on the international eye at the moment. And we already export to 4 to 5 countries, which is getting a big demand coming through. So I think that about wraps this one up, Pete.
Absolutely, Brian. Yeah. It's a pleasure to be back, and we're going to try to punch these out weekly now moving forward, so our listeners don't have to wait 3 years to hear from us.
We might have a few special guests coming up. We've got a very big end of the year coming with the big event and that massive event called Equitana. So watch this space. Thanks everyone for your support. We love the feedback. Everyone is enjoying these podcasts, even deep diving back in the day as well when they go on their long trips. And yeah, we can't thank you guys enough.
Yeah, and also to our friends in Belgium and the UK who I spoke to, thank you for your support, and they're loving the podcast as well. They're just not getting our gin jokes, so that's why I've changed to Aperol.
We're going to change this alcohol up. Okay. All right. All good.
Thanks,
all right.
everyone.
Thanks, guys.